Our presenter today is Brian Wood, and Brian is a seasoned web technology trainer, Adobe Creative instructor, and the author of books and training videos on Acrobat, Illustrator, Dreamweaver, and InDesign. In addition to his regular training programs, Brian speaks regularly at national conferences such as Adobe Max, the InDesign Conference, as well as at events hosted by AIGA and other industry organizations. He also has a free video tips blog at www.brianwoodtips.com and a video learning site at www.askbrianwood.com. So without further ado, I'm pretty sure everyone can now see Brian's screen. So Brian, it's all yours.
Excellent. Thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm not either too loud or too soft. Anyway, we are going to take a look today at some Photoshop production skills. Now, this is going to include a lot of different things. And since a lot of us have different skill levels, some of the things you might see, you might know, some you might not. One of the things I really want you to come away with is just a few things at least that you didn't know before, or you haven't seen, or you haven't used in a while maybe, and it's a nice refresher. So that's kind of what we're doing today. Anyway, I'm in Photoshop CS5, and technically it's CS 5.1, which ships with CS 5.5. And we're going to take a look at a lot of different things as far as working with the workspace. We're going to talk a little bit about working with Bridge and show you a few cool things in there, and just use a lot of the tools. So let's get started. In Photoshop here, I'm going to open up a file real quick. And one of the things that I tend to use a lot these days, especially in Photoshop CS5, because this is where it came into being, was the mini bridge. Mini bridge, if you look over here on the right, you can see there's a small version of Adobe Bridge. Now, I don't know how many of you have worked with Adobe Bridge before. Some people like it, some people don't. But mini bridge is I guess you can say, a smaller version of Bridge, more compact. It allows you to do some of the similar things you can do with Adobe Bridge, and it's a great way to be able to see files, to drag them into existing files if you're going to maybe composite some files or some images together, open a file, things like that. So from mini bridge, I can, of course, navigate using different folders, different locations, different methods here, find a folder I want, double-click a file, and if it is set to be like maybe it's a Photoshop file and the association set correctly in your operating system, it'll open in Photoshop. So there's a picture right there you can see. If we want to, like I said, take things like, I don't know, this picture right here, and we're going to composite the two, I can simply drag and drop. You can drag multiple images, and it treats it as if you're dragging from one image window to another. So it gives you the little, transform handles. You can go in and do your thing if you feel okay with that. And then press Enter, return, and you've got yourself your multiple images. Another great thing that I tend to do, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here. I'm trying to stay, in a path and coherent, but as I think of things, I'm going to be kind of explaining them and showing them. But if you happen to do, let's say you want to do compositing work, which we probably do a lot of, bringing multiple images together, making sure they're the right resolution, size, etc. One of the great things that I really like about Photoshop is the ability to work with a lot of different things, to import, to work with scripts and things like that. You're going to see that we have the ability to do things like, I don't know, delete empty layers, export layers to files, load multiple images into a single file, things like that. One thing I want to show you in just a little while here when we get to Bridge is when you composite, you can actually take a bunch of files or images and load them into layers in Photoshop into a single file. So that's one thing I'm trying to remind myself to show you. But let me keep this open, actually. I'm going to show you a nice little feature we have available in just a little bit here. I'm going to scroll up and go to one of the folders and open that up. And I'm going to start out by showing you what seems kind of simple, but are a couple of newer features in Photoshop and how you can use them together to do some really cool things. For instance, I've got this boy kicking a ball. Let me hide mini bridge. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to maybe take his leg and bring it up a little bit and then bring the ball down a bit. And using, like I said, a few techniques to get this done, maybe making it a little bit easier on myself. Now, when we want to do this, a lot of times you're going to be working on imagery and you're going to want to do things like maybe hide the panels, stuff like that as you're working. Well, here's a couple quick tips. Some of you may already know, but if you press the Tab key, you can hide all the panels and the toolbars and everything else you've got out here. If you press Shift-Tab, you can hide just the panels on the right. Now, what's cool about that, and this is something I didn't realize until relatively recently, is if you press Shift-Tab and you hide the panels over on the right, if you want to see them again, you don't have to press Shift-Tab again. I mean, of course you can. But if they're hidden, you can always bring your cursor to the edge of the screen and they'll pop open. You can use them, move your cursor back, and they will hide again. So that's something that's kind of neat. Another thing is if you want to hide everything except maybe the panels on the right or something like that, if I press the Tab key and then I press Shift-Tab, you can hide and show, rather, just the panels on the right rather than everything else. All these different combinations of shortcuts and keyboard commands and things like that, really there's a lot of possibilities with them to be able to work with your workspace the way you want to. So if I press Tab right now, I can bring it all back, of course. As we work in images as well, a lot of times we want to zoom in, of course, this is Photoshop, right? So a lot of the zoom in commands that I tend to use are either, of course, using the zoom tools. We can use Command plus on Mac, Control plus on Windows, and that'll zoom in. Command plus, or Command minus rather, and Control minus on Windows will zoom out. And you'll see we can do a lot of different things. Now, one thing I like to do is if I want to zoom out, I want to be able to see the gray area beyond the canvas, because sometimes I want to do transformations or paint, on the edge or something like that. It gets annoying. If I press Command 0 as fit, instead of just pressing Command minus or Control minus on Windows to make it smaller like I just did, what you can do is you can actually press Command Option minus or Control Alt minus, and what that does is it resizes the canvas instead of the whole window. Okay, so you can then go in and make it a little bit smaller, and that's, like I said, it's Command Option minus on Mac and Control Alt minus on Windows, and I always forget those anyway. So that way we can kind of see what's going on. Another thing you can do when you're working in Photoshop, just as a quick housekeeping thing to get us started here, we of course can set preferences, and I just want to show you a few key preferences that I think are really pretty cool. If I go into Photoshop Preferences and go to just General, and you'll see the shortcut there, you can open them up, and a lot of you have probably been in here, I know. You'll see that we have a shortcut here, or a preference rather, called Zoom Resizes Windows. That's one I always turn on. You can turn it on, you can turn it off, depending on what you're doing, but that's what helps me to be able to zoom in and out using those keyboard commands I just told you about. If you want to zoom with your scroll wheel, if you've got a mouse that does a scroll wheel, let's say, you can of course say, yeah, let's zoom with the scroll wheel. That means I scroll up and down, it'll actually zoom in and out, and I honestly don't like that, but anyway. And one of the other things that I want to mention here that I think is awesome, and the reason why I'm going to do it now is because when I'm done with the file, we can kind of see what's happened. How many of you have ever wanted to work on a file and then be able to either send it to somebody or have somebody send you a file and be able to see the history on it, to see what they did to it, instead of them taking a screenshot of the history panel or something like that? Well, in the latest or last few versions of Photoshop, we've been able to create what's called a history log. Now, here's the catch, here's the key, okay? With this history log thing, you got to do it before you start working on the file, and it's not going to let you see history and go back in time. It's just going to let you see what's done to the file. It's just a log, that's all it is. And it's saved within the file if you wanted to. So before I start working on a big project that I'm going to hand over, let's say to a printer, a press, whatever, sometimes I'll turn on history log, I'll click OK, and I'll start working. Now, that's going to save all of the moves I make in here into the file itself, and we can then see that in the metadata later on. Anybody can if they open up Photoshop. You can also save the history, you can also save the history into a text file, which is separate. You can save it in the both as well. This is probably the best part. When you do this, when you turn this history log thing on and you start working, what it does is in the file itself, it saves in the metadata only the sessions that you work in, meaning when you open, when you save, I believe, when you close, those types of things, those are the only things that are recorded. If you want to record what you do, like let's say I'm going to go in and make a selection. I'm going to change the levels. I'm going to cut. I'm going to do this. You can choose concise. That'll literally step-by-step list what somebody did in the file. If you want to show what they did and the settings that they set, like let's say they did levels and you want to show that they did, you know, X, Y, Z, 2 levels, you can choose detailed. Now, I'm going to choose detailed just so we can see what it does. But like I said, you can turn this on, you can turn it off depending on what you're working on, and it saves the information into the file by default. So there's a lot of other preferences in here we could look at. I'm sure some of you have your favorites and, you know, that sort of thing. But I'm just going to stop it there and click OK. And now as we work, it will save that metadata. And I'll show you when we're done with this file what that looks like. All right. I want to take the boy. I want to take his leg and bring it up and bring the ball down. Now, it's Photoshop. There's 5,000 ways to do this, right? Well, like I said, I'm going to show you a couple ways using some of the newer tools in here. First of all, I'm going to come over to the Layers panel on the right, and I'm going to reset my workspace real quick just so it's like we all see. In the Layers panel on the right-hand side over here, we're going to see that we have a locked background layer. I'm always looking for the fastest way to unlock the background layer. I'm kind of lazy, so I want to get working. But if you double-click the thumbnail, you can go in and say New Layer, OK. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll double-click the thumbnail and just hit Return, and I've got myself an unlocked, unnamed layer. Well, one of the fastest ways I've found to unlock the background layer is to hold down the Option key on Mac, hold on the Alt key on Windows, and double-click the thumbnail, and it just goes around that dialog box and just says, all right, we're going to unlock it and call it Layer 0 or Layer 1 or whatever. So anyway, that's a nice easy way to unlock the layer. What I want to do is make a selection of the boy and the ball. 5,000 ways we can do this, right? We can use what's called color range. We can go in and use selection tools. I'm going to use one of the selection tools that I tend to rely pretty heavily on. And this is, when I do professional work, I use different methods. Of course, we all do, but the quick selection tool, I think, is a decent tool for certain things. Quick selection tool, if you select it and come out here, you'll see that what's going to wind up happening, and let me zoom in here, is and this is not the best quality image file, that's fine. What's going to happen here is it's going to sample and basically grab the same, I guess you could say, gray level or pixel color within this sample area, this circle. So if I click once, it's going to say, okay, well, you just clicked on a certain brown. It's going to say, all right, well, let's grab what's close. It's going to be contiguous, and there we go. If I click and drag and continue, it's just going to keep sampling and grabbing until it finds the edges of that color, basically. Now, we can change the size of the brush pretty easily. This is a great tool tip if you haven't used this kind of thing before. In the past, we could use the bracket keys, right? So left bracket, right bracket. And essentially, if you look up here in the control panel, it's changing the size of the brush. So as I go right bracket, left bracket. Now, a tip for that is if you want to make the brush softer or harder, if you hold down the Shift key and use the right bracket, it's going to make it harder. Shift key, press the left bracket a bunch of times, it's going to make it softer. And if you look right up here, hardness, I got it all the way down to 0 here. Now, another shortcut for working with the brushes, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Another shortcut for working with the brushes to make it bigger or smaller, and we've been able to do this in a couple of versions here, is to go in and if you hold down Control and Option on Mac and then left click, drag right and left, you can change the brush size. It's a little weirder on Windows. If you hold down Alt, right click, drag right and left, you can change the brush size. If you drag up and down, you can change the softness and the hardness. So you've got 2 levels here of changing the brush size and, you know, whatever you want to work with. It's a trickier one, and sometimes I'll actually forget that one. But like I said, it's Control Option on Mac, drag right and left. You got to click drag, and then it's Alt, right click, drag right, left, up or down on Windows. All right, let me go down a little bit here. I'm going to make the brush a little bit smaller using my shortcut. Go out, start to drag. Now what's going to happen here is as I start to go along, click and drag, it's going to make kind of a sloppy selection, and that's fine for right now. I'll go down and grab his leg, make sure that all the white down here is selected, and I'll grab the shoe on the left. Let me move over a little bit. Shoe on the left. There we go. And this is a demo, so I'm not going to get crazy, but you'll see that it got a little nuts here. It went a little further out. So if I want to get rid of some of that, just like any other selection tool, I can hold down the Alt on Windows, Option on Mac, and just go in and start to kind of get rid of that. So you'll see the minus show up, and getting a little crazy here. Now I'm getting a little anal. I got to stop. All right, there we go. Now I'm going to grab the ball, go up here. I'm going to make my brush pretty big. Control Option on Mac, drag it out. I'm just going to make it simple. There we go. Nice ball selection. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to fill in the area behind this boy with cloud. So I just want to kind of quickly get it filled in, and then we're going to make him a separate layer, and we're going to distort him. Like I said, there's 50 ways to do this. You might have a good method, but I'm trying to show you a couple different ways. If we want to right now, we can go in and use what's called ContentAware Fill. That means if I delete, it's going to get rid of them. Okay, so let me do this. I'm going to go back to the Move tool. I'm just going to press Delete right now. Now, unfortunately, what's going to happen here is it's just going to do what it says. It's going to delete them. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to have Photoshop go in and use that new ContentAware, which came in CS5. So I'll undo. And to get that to happen, we need to have the layer down here in the Layers panel be a background layer, a locked background layer. So one of the layers has got to be a background layer that you're going to delete stuff on. To make it a locked background layer, a couple ways we can do this. I can go up to Layer and go to New and choose Background from Layer if I've already unlocked it. Now it's got to be a background layer. It can't just be a locked layer. So I'm going to choose Background from Layer, and it'll turn it back into the background locked layer. Now if I delete right now, it's going to get rid of it, and that's great, but it's going to try and heal, which means it's going to grab along the edge here and try and heal what's outside and what's inside. So we're going to have a nice edge going, which is going to look pretty stupid. So what I want to do is I want to make the selection bigger. We want to have it go out into the edge, into the clouds, into the sky. A lot of ways we can do that. I'm going to go up to Select, and we're going to use like an old school. You can try a Refine Edge, which is what we tend to use a lot. Use an old school Modify, and a lot of us have used these over the years, I'm sure. Something like an Expand. So I'll use an Expand. I'll expand it by, I don't know, whatever, 5 pixels, 6 pixels, something like that. Just get it away from the boy so we have a little bit of room. I'm probably going to want more than this, but for a demo, I think we're okay. The layer is a locked background layer. We've got what we need selected. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of him first, because if we delete him, he's gone, right? So to make a copy of him, one of the quicker ways to do that is press Command-J or Control-J on Windows. With a selection, it's going to make a copy of the layer. Now, it's not going to work with a layer mask or anything like that. It's going to actually cut them out so you can see what it does. Okay? Now, there's a lot of ways we could handle that. I could make a copy of the layer, have a mask, whatever you want to do. It's up to your workflow. Let me go over to the boy over there. I'm going to get the selection back from him. Now, sometimes, I don't know how many of you have ever seen this before, but if I go up to the Select menu, how many of you have ever used Reselect? In certain situations, if you get rid of a selection, like you deselect, you can actually choose Reselect to select the last selection. Does that make sense? You can also save a selection. There's a lot of ways you can do this, but I want to pull the selection from that boy again, from that layer we just created. So an easy way to do that is to go to the Layer thumbnail in the Layers panel, Command on Mac, Control on Windows, click to get the selection back, right? I'm going to go back to the background layer. Now, a quick way to do that, if you're working with layers a lot, which we almost have to in Photoshop, right? You want to navigate layers. What you can do is you can hold down the Option key on Mac, Alt on Windows, left right bracket. And what that does, if you look over my layers panel, Option right bracket goes up, Option left bracket goes down the layer stack. So you can sort of navigate the layers, get to the one you want, and do what you need to do. All right, we're back on the background layer. I'm just going to hit Delete right now. This is going to use the new ContentAware Fill feature in CS5. You can see right here, if you wanted to use this, I don't have to press Delete. I can actually go up to Edit Fill. There's a lot of ways you can do this. You're going to see ContentAware. That's cool. I'll click OK. And once again, if it's not a locked background layer, it won't work. I'll click OK. Now, it doesn't look like it did much here, but I'll deselect, Command-D or Control-D. I'll turn off the boy layer, and you're going to see what it gives me. So I now have him, and if I did a little bit better selection out there, I probably would have had a better job, but it did a pretty good job. I'll do a little touch-up, but that's fine. All right, now I'm going to select the boy layer, and what we're going to do is we're going to take his leg, move it up, move the ball down, get it to where we want it. To do that, it's going to require something that's pretty easy. Now, once again, we could just select the ball, maybe cut it, put a new layer, move it, things like that. But I'm trying to use some of the features that are built into the program here, which can make your life a little easier. And one of them is called Puppet Warp. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this in demos and things like that, but I actually use this in real life of a decent amount, not a ton, but a decent amount. So if you select a layer, like the boy, and I choose Puppet Warp,